Welcome to Windows on the World, and in this part of the show we're going to be talking to Sandy Adams. Sandy, as you may know, is one of the speakers on The Bigger Picture, where we talk about, yes, the bigger picture, things that affect everyone on the planet from a global to a local level. And one of the things which Sandy has been looking into recently is the Transgender Agenda. Yes, when we announced in our talks a few weeks ago that we're now 39 agendas in New York, I was scratching my head because I could only think of two. However, Sandy's going to fill us in with a bit more of the detail on this. She's been looking into it. Obviously, in my view, if anyone who listens to the show, this is ideological subversion. It's basically to depopulate the planet. And when we go into the agenda behind it, the agenda is very similar. It gets put into the public domain, the public start taking it up. So we're going to talk to Sandy about that tonight in this part of Windows on the World. Are you there, Sandy?
I am indeed. Thanks, Mark. It's good to hear you tonight. Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, I really, when we were up in Manchester, a couple of people came up to me and had concerns about this particular topic and said, when are we going to do something on the show? And we've all been busy, and I've been dipping in and out of it. And sure enough, it's a real hot potato at the moment, because it's like everything else at the moment. It's there to divide everyone. As if we haven't got enough division with Brexit and climate change, and this is kind of there to do exactly the same thing. Years ago, not that long ago, we'd never heard of the word gender, the whole transgender thing. It was always transsexual, the word sex. It was always sex, not gender. But that's been deconstructed into sex has now become gender, because actually the whole ideology is to get rid of sex, to get rid of the binary, which is male and female. And so now they're saying that when you're born, you are assigned a sex. Well, no, you're not. You biologically you are a sex. You're not assigned it or designated it at birth. Sure, a doctor has to come along and look and see what you appear to be. And of course, what you appear to be is usually defined by your chromosomes and all the other things that happen within the fetus when it's being formed. And when you're born, you present as either male or female. There are anomalies, obviously, which is intersex people are nothing to do with the transgender thing. That is simply anomalies at birth, which usually are put right soon after birth. Either they get put right naturally, or they are helped along so that the natural, what appears to be the dominant sexual feature is actually encouraged. So it's a very difficult thing, because now gender is trying to say, the whole transgender movement is trying to do away with the binary, which is male and female, which is basically what nature actually creates life through that. There are always anomalies, but in the main, nature is binary. So you're going against the laws of nature in a way by creating something that didn't exist before. Now, obviously, transsexual people did exist before. And I can remember, in my teenagehood, there were people that were going through transition, and usually they went for reassignment. But nowadays it's become a kind of social construct. I mean, turning it into gender has taken it away from a biological construct to a social construct, which is quite an interesting concept. And it has its roots in radical feminism, funny enough. And it's interesting because now all the feminists are now calling the radical transgender a misogyny. So it's all become very, very convoluted, where you've got people like Germaine Greer being completely vilified for being against the transgender movement, simply because it's become politicized. It's become heavily politicized, and it's not just about people, feeling. For a start, it's not called gender. What was it called? It was gender. It's now gender.
Get a bit of feedback through your mic there. Can you just back off from your mic a bit?
Yeah, sure. It used to be called gender identity disorder, and now it's been called gender dysphoria, which is very different. Gender dysphoria is a form of depression, and it's how you feel, whereas gender disorder, gender identity disorder was actually a mental illness. And there seems to be a sort of a political correctness going on where it's not considered out of the ordinary or indeed a mental disorder. It's now something that is mainstream, and in fact the push for it is to make it more mainstream than heterosexuality, and I'll go into that. I mean, there's now over 50 different genders. I mean, some people might be shocked about that.
I thought there was only 39.
There's 39 in New York State, but actually there's about 50, and they I mean, I could list them, but it's just. I mean, some of them are. It's just become. I mean, shall I list some of them because they sound extraordinary?
Please do.
Yeah, there's androsexual, gynosexual, questioning, asexual, demisexual, grey asexual, perio-oriented, vario-oriented, heteronormative, I think that's us actually, that's me, grey gender, aporogender, maverick, novigender. I mean, it just goes on and on. And there are also pronouns that go with these, so that you have to address them in a certain way. And it's actually changing the language we use to describe gender, and it's very subversive. All I can say is that the way it's being used is subversive, because it's interesting that the whole of the animal and plant kingdom works on a binary system to ensure that life goes on. But it would seem that the most intelligent of the species seems to be wrestling with this concept. And transgenderism is causing, the whole transgender agenda is causing a lot of chaos and confusion in certain places, like the military, for instance. Obama introduced it into the military agenda I think it was in 2015, and that has caused a huge amount of chaos within the military. And we're finding now that in our schools, the Common Core education in the States, and even in our primary schools, it is being taught. I've got parents that I know who pulled their children out of primary school because it's being sort of filtered into the curriculum. And this is something that is quite worrying, actually, because it's being mainstreamed. It's as though it should be happening, and it's creating this divide between people. And there's various bills going through Parliament that I think are quite worrying. The Gender Recognition Act of 2010 is being revised so that anybody can actually change their gender by going online and just filling in a form, which is the the Gender Recognition Act form, and they can just say what they are. Say, right, well, I'm a man now, and you can just get this form, and you can change your birth certificate and your passport to be whatever you want to be, which is fine, but you don't need any medical, sort of intervention whatsoever, which lays a whole raft of kind of conundrums for everyone, because you're blurring the edges of everything. Then who do you let into toilets? People.
Well, it also comes down to what is reality.
Well, exactly. Yeah, I think that's it. Really,
it's the destruction of reality, and of course, it's all being encouraged through universities. Really, it's people who want to focus on these things, which I think are quite trivial, because previously this wasn't a big issue. It was something that was rather uncommon, and we all knew people who were transsexual or transvestite. Yeah. Everyone would know somebody or who knew of somebody who was, and it was never really a big deal. But the point is, they're making it into a mental illness and a neurosis, and they're going to create mental illness and neurosis through doing it. But you're not allowed to say that, because that's politically incorrect and not inclusive and vibrant and diverse, you see.
Exactly. And the thing is that I think the worst thing about this is that if anybody in any kind of medical institution or educational institution or law or whatever stands up and says that they don't agree with this, and there are quite a few doctors who are saying, well, actually I don't agree with this, because there's such a high suicide rate. 41% of trans people that go through this process of having the hormones and some of them do end up having reassignment, but some of them don't actually reach that stage. But an awful lot of them do commit suicide because, to be honest, they are mixed up to begin with, and they're told that this is normal. It's normal to be gender fluid. Well, the thing is that the suicide rates are horrendous. So they are obviously not stable at the point of deciding to do this, and I think it's a lot of doctors are finding it ethically wrong, but they can't speak out against it because they are struck off, because they're not embracing it, and the General Medical Council are actually being told to encourage it. So it really is a hot potato. So if you speak out against it, so it is a form of total subversion. You're not allowed to speak out against it.
I mean, this is incredible, really. Someone's just put into the chat, they've said the transgender MMA fighter should be banned and prosecuted. Now, this is this man who's now beating up women, and it's a sport, you see, and he's allowed to compete as a woman even though he's a man. Now, this to me is beyond mental illness. It means that the population have just been willingly subverted, and the population has to be willingly subverted, so they've let it happen.
Yeah, I mean, basically it's dismantling freedom in the name of freedom, you know, and building a power base for the state at the same time. It's a very clever way of doing it, because what it's doing is it's destroying the family, and that's what, you know, my biggest concern is that you know, family and real community, I don't mean fake community, real community and family, the power base is with the family, and if you destroy that, then it's so easy for the state to come in and own those children, and that's the worrying thing for me. You know, obviously you're always going to get, and I have huge compassion for people that do have you know, a dysphoria of their identity, but let's face it, most teenagers do. I mean, I've had teenagers, and they go through all sorts of phases, you know. They go through phases of body dysmorphic, you know, they hate their bodies because they're changing so rapidly. And when they end up going to university, some of them are isolated. So they might join these groups because it's all being, you know, they're being engineered to take in the lonely ones, the ones that are vulnerable. And somehow mould them and find, you know, and it's trendy. It's so trendy when you've got people like Bruce Jenner or Caitlyn, you know, he changed from Bruce to Caitlyn, didn't he? It's all very fashionable at the moment, you know.
Well, they always use celebrities to push this.
Yeah. And you've got the whole Hollywood thing going on with, you know, media and social media as well, where it's being normalised. It's being normalised to the point of completely normal, and actually, you know, you're in a minority if you are heterosexual, and actually, you know, getting rid of the words man and woman is major in this, because I noticed that in their list of genders there is no man or woman. You are cisgender if you are somebody who identifies in the body that they were born with. And if you actually are heterosexual and you identify with the body you're born with, you are cis-het. You are not a woman, you are a cis-het. Or you're not a man, you are a cis-het. well, I'm sorry, I don't like that. I want to be a woman. And I'm sure, you and Piers want to be men, don't you? So what is that all about? Changing and also they're bringing in legislation to protect this whole raft of genders, so that if you actually speak out against it, or you don't agree with it, or you're not using the right pronoun, you can be fined. In America, I think the fine is £250,000 if you are in any way interrupting this flow of ideology.
Yeah, at this point, the way things are, my view of it is now, well, if people want to do that, let them get on with it. But don't try and include me. Yeah,
I know. That's what I'm worried about. You've got children involved, and that's, for me, that's a real big issue. It's child abuse.
Well, it is. It's total child abuse, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was listening to a thing today. There was something in one of the newspapers that said in England today there's 800 children who've been assigned to. What was it? They've been assigned to gender dysphoria clinics. And about 200 of those are under 14. Now, that's really worrying. I mean, that is incredibly worrying, because children of under 14 actually don't know what they want. They don't know who they are. And they will naturally come to that decision. Being a mother, you see your children just go through all these different sort of stages, and you know that at some point they'll sort themselves out, and they do. With a bit of help, they sort themselves out. And I'm not saying if a child wants to be gay, or a child wants to be sort of a transgender person, and it's really obvious that that's going to happen, you'd go along with it. But this is being forced on children, so that they're actually given puberty blockers, which will change them forever. They will never be able to, like, if it's a girl, she will never be able to have a child. And it's that whole thing of forcing an ideology onto very impressionable youngsters, really, and it's quite frightening. I mean, a friend of mine's daughter went off to university. She'd always been quite just a normal young girl, and she's now having her breast removed, and she's only 23. And her mother's worried in case she changes her mind at some point, and that this does happen. There are people who have gone through gender reassignment and have changed their minds and gone back again. And either way, it's never a good outcome, because of the butchery that you have to go through for all that. And you never hear in the mainstream media about the ones that didn't work, and there's a lot of them. I think there's a guy who also, a guy called, I can't remember his name now. There's a guy who was a sports journalist, and he did that. He was quite a vocal guy on YouTube and everything, and he transitioned to a female, and then transitioned back again because he wasn't happy. It didn't work for him, and he was shut down from speaking about it, and he eventually killed himself, which was pretty horrible, really. But this happens. If you are somebody that's had a bad experience with it, you are not allowed to speak about it. You're shut down, and it's a one-way street, really. There's another guy that transitioned back, and he tried to have his birth certificate changed back. He tried for 8 years, and he wasn't allowed to. And yet, online, you can change your birth certificate if you want to be transgender. So it's a one-way street. It's a very, very subversive, sort of, what's happening is subversive, because it's undermining what has been and what actually works in society. It's against society. It's certainly against the family unit, and it's pro-state.
Well, people have to ask themselves why the state is supporting it, why the state is actually facilitating it.
Oh.
And then they've got to ask themselves, what does the state actually there for? Because the state is meant to be there to serve us. And if they're imposing an agenda like that, it's clearly, in my view, to get the world down to the global billion. and that seems to be quite a good business model for achieving it. If you think about it, let's think about it practically. What's it really for? And of course, it's to cause neurosis, panic, kind of internal conflict, and of course, it's a huge distraction from other things that are going on.
Yeah, yeah, and it's trying to just re-engineer society. I mean, to say that that the terms man and woman are a bias of society. I mean, it's ludicrous. It's changing what is a biological fact into some kind of fantasy, and I mean, even things like I think it's the LGBTQ Foundation. I think it was last week, were found to be giving for free to young girls chest binders. Now, these are very, very constricting garments that are worn by people that want to flatten their chests, and they actually cause a lot of harm to breast tissue and to their chest. They actually can bruise ribs, and they're giving them to underage girls without consent. They're posting them to them. To underage girls who want to transition to boys, and there's a lot of them, and they're doing it without the parents' consent, obviously. And one mother found, she intercepted the mail, opened it, and found that her daughter was wearing a chest binder, and this girl was only 12. And so that's in England. That's the LGBTQ Foundation actually giving these away. That's really, really worrying.
Well, it is, and the people who are being promoted to promote this should be looked at as well. And if you think about it, this is an extinction. That's what it's about. If you want to reduce the population, this is probably the quickest way of doing it, along with the other things that are happening. So this is going to cause absolute fracturing of the mental processes of the human race, which is obviously what it's there to do, in my opinion. Yeah.
I mean, we've already got a huge decline in sperm counts all over sort of America, Canada, and Europe.
That's something I am hearing a lot about, and it's very common. And I remember times when women in their late 40s didn't have a problem even conceiving, but now it's in their 30s they're having problems. So there's definitely something going on. No one actually seems to be able to pinpoint it, and of course people will go, oh, it's chemtrails, it's this, it's that, and it's the water, and it's this and it's that. It is a number of things, but I think that you have to put everything together and go, well, let's see how many of these factors are causing it, if it's not just one. And of course Wi-Fi in schools is a massive one.
Oh, it's a huge one, and yes, and things like baby monitors. The EMF that comes out of baby monitors on a small child. It can affect them as well. If it's a boy, it will affect the testes, and with girls they're born with all their eggs intact. So there's that, and there's cell phones, men wearing cell phones in their pockets. All of that, and also the plastics. You've got plastic in these. I think they're called
bisphenol A.
Yeah, and all of that is in the plastics, and they've got estrogens in them, and soy in every loaf of bread you buy from a supermarket now has got soy in it. Now, soy is a phytoestrogen, it mimics estrogen, and men are eating, you don't expect that every loaf of bread in supermarket, shops is full of soy, but it is. And that will be feminizing. And then there's a contraceptive pill that can't be filtered out of water. And in somewhere like London, where they recycle the water, that contraceptive hormone, estrogen, is going to be in the water. So there's a number of factors that are feminizing people, as well as pushing this transgender agenda onto children.
Well, everything really that's been said, can you turn your radio down in the background, please, Sandy? Yeah, everything that is being said was said by Dr. Richard Day in that 60s lecture.
Yeah.
They're called the New Barbarians, the tapes. There was a fellow called Lawrence Dunnigan who was there, who reported on it, and Dr. Richard Day said to everybody in the room, just, this is off the record and this is what's going to happen. In other words, do something about it. Well, people haven't done anything about it, and it's happened. So if you look at all this stuff as a strategy, this has been brought in very, very quickly. And a lot of the stuff that we've talked about is brought in fairly slowly with a 30-year plan, maybe longer. But this is escalated within a couple of years, really, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been exponential, really. Obama had a lot to do with it. He put a lot of legislation through in America. He pushed an awful lot with the.
Well, the people who are behind him pushed it. I mean, it's not the politicians, is it? They don't have anything to do with it. They just repeat what they're told. And that's the biggest part of it. I mean, if people thought that the government did anything, then they have to look at this, because a lot of this stuff and the looting of the public, the destruction of jobs, the destruction of businesses, especially people's ability to make a living, is all being facilitated by our so-called government. So it's obviously not them, is it? Because they're meant to be elected and they're meant to represent us, so they don't represent us. But I'm sure Mr. Corbyn's going to have a word about that, because obviously his brother is going to change things, isn't he, Piers? So, do you think
well, absolutely.
You have to say
for accountability and trickle down. In fact, restructuring of the economy to get people off their knees and make the massive profits from banks be completely decreased. I think the interesting points come up on this is the role of Obama in promoting it is interesting, because he came to Britain a few years ago and had this great conference meeting with the youth where he was promoting this stuff, which I just was quite surprised. And I'm also pretty amazed at the way governments and all parties just kind of take it, because there's two issues that must contradict their agenda. One is wasting money in the NHS, because a lot of this stuff is expensive, and quite frankly, money will be better spent tackling, various illnesses and that people do have, rather than sex changes which people.
But we're not talking about a financial thing. It's not the money that matters. It's the destruction of minds. And
it is. But I'm talking about there is a cost in the NHS.
Oh yeah.
And
of course. And that was one thing I wanted to get onto, actually, Sandy.
So before we do that, you just mention. Third thing I wanted to point out is just ask about the role of the church in this, because you see, I don't think any religion actually promotes this type of stuff. Yet, I haven't heard anything out of any church saying it's wrong. I mean, that they might do quietly, but there's not a movement against this stuff. They're just sort of lying back and accepting it. Well, why is that?
Well, the Vatican are all for it.
Well, how can the Vatican be for it?
Yeah.
Well, they are, because if you listen to what the Pope said about every subversive agenda, they're on board with all of it. And of course, that is basically the universal church, which trickles down to obviously the Church of England, which is not really a church anymore. It's like a lobbying group for all of these agendas, like Agenda 21 and all the rest of it. They're on board with all of it. They are totally and utterly toothless. So, in other words, we've kind of seen a reverse situation from the Middle Ages where they were all powerful. So that's an interesting thing. But obviously the destruction of religion is the most important thing. And the One World Government relies on having an irreligious population, which is easy to control. And that's why the promotion of nihilism, the promotion of all this stuff is there. It's fairly obvious, I think, when you look at it in the context of what it is, which is it's a management plan for the planet Earth. It's a way to manage the population, to reduce the population, to cause them to be absolutely confused and to disempower them completely. What could be better?
Yeah. In fact, in America, I was listening to something today. In America, the churches are actually funded to promote this.
Really? They collect money
and
for
and
taxpayers'
actually,
money.
a lot of churches in England are having LGBTQ mornings in the church, and there's Christians for LGBTQ, and so that agenda is being pushed in churches as well in England, Church of England churches. I don't know whether it is in Catholic churches. I know that certainly in some churches I know where they're having that agenda. So yeah, it's not. It's. You wonder how that's happening, because the church is supposed to be all about family values, and it's something that is clearly destroying family values.
Well, they've been really trying to push neo-paganist agendas and all the New Age stuff for quite a long time. They want to be all-embracing, all-encompassing to try and get people through the door. But when you hear people like Justin Welby, you know that they're not a church anymore. He's merely a lobbying group for interested parties. That's all he is. He's a puppet.
Yeah, there's probably money somewhere being exchanged. I don't know.
I think these people are just chosen. They're not what they appear to be. I mean, he's just a change agent. If you hear him speaking, he doesn't speak from any ecclesiastical point of view at all.
No.
Well, I haven't heard him do that anyway.
It's secular now anyway, isn't it? It's totally secular, the whole Church of England, I believe, yeah.
Angie's just made a point which I think is the most important one. It's down to the people again if this is going to be stopped. So there you go. It's down to people. And if they allow this to happen, then it will happen. That's all there is to it. Yeah,
I totally agree. And the thing that I don't know, I was thinking about it this afternoon, and if it's about having the courage to stand up and not be politically correct and say, actually, I don't agree with this, and be able to have one-on-one conversations, a bit like we're having now with people who are listening. It's finding ears to listen to see how totally alien this agenda is. I mean, it's a bridge towards transhumanism, which, I do believe that. If you look at the stuff that Elon Musk is coming out with, if you get rid of gender, you've got a clear bridge to transhumanism. And that's the agenda. We know that that's the agenda. It's mixing man with machine. And the thing is that if people are going to just bow down to, and just not speak out because they're scared of being sent to prison or losing their jobs or whatever, at least talk to your peers about it, talk to people about it, and that sort of one-on-one communication. I mean, there's an amazing man who's written a book called The Power of the Powerless. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, Mark. It's by a former Czech Republic president, and his name's Václav Havel.
Yes, I've quoted him. I've quoted him quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, his whole thing is just keep talking, keep talking on the radio, keep talking to your friends. Don't allow this, because there'll be people who will come together, because as soon as they know that somebody else is standing up against it, they realise that they're not alone, because with this fear that you are actually being politically incorrect, everybody's shutting their mouths. They're not saying anything when bad things are happening. And if you stand up, and this is what his book about Power for the Powerless is all about. That it's about not giving up and just keeping on. And that's the only way we will ever win any of this. About Agenda 21, all the agendas that are going on at the moment that we're being flung at. We really need to just keep on. And if anybody wants to get that book, it's a very good book. It's about how to get power when you are actually powerless. When all the Hollywood, the media, the social media, the TV, the films, everything is full of the agenda that they want you to actually believe in. And it's about standing up to that and saying, no, actually, this is not right. And it's not a matter of left or right. It's a matter of right or wrong. That's what it's all about, really.
Yeah, it's where does the programming actually begin and end? And it begins when you turn the TV on. And that's what I always say to people. And they go, oh, but I like some things on there. But once you switch this stuff off for any period of time, you realise that everything on there is programming. I mean, because you start to think differently if you don't watch it. and you have to make your own mind up and do your own research. Now, the thing is that when what I suppose a lot of people would call the end times, because the subversion is off the charts, and the Agenda 2030, the actual agenda that's being played out by our own governments, is all about depopulation and killing off people who they don't want, whether it's through universal credit, whether it's because the disability cuts, all the rest of it. These are pretty genocidal agendas, and anybody who can't see that is being mass brainwashed with everything, because if you can't see that, then there is something fundamentally wrong, and it's a very difficult one to get that over to people who think that everything outside the Guardian or the BBC is a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, exactly. It's it really is, free speech. You either use it or you lose it. You've got to speak out. You've got to. This is something so fundamental when you're faced with a totalitarian regime, which is what we're living under. And unless we speak out, unless we have the courage to speak out, and this is why I think it's great that we go out on the road and do this stuff, because we're just communicating with people one to one is so important, and as Vaclav said, the private sphere is the biggest prize, because if you can actually have personal relationships and say what you need to say on a one-to-one basis, whether it's on the radio or whatever, that is the prize. It's in personal one-to-one conversations, because you're not going to get it anywhere else. You're just not going to get it.
Interesting point that's come up in the chat. This is Angie again. Without male and female, we are finished. But she carries on. But can you see cultures other than Western ones, can you see Muslims buying into this? Because it's aimed at Europeans. If you look at it, I don't think it'd get hold of many other places apart from. It might do in certain parts of Asia, but the thing is that this will not catch on with Muslims at all. So it basically is being foisted on the Europeans.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of migration into Europe is all about this as well. It's about getting rid of the Europeans. And all of this is completely obvious. It's interesting, actually, because there's somebody who, Facebook is actually the place to fall out with people, isn't it? I mean, it's just made for it, because if you don't offend anyone, they'll get the wrong idea about something else. It happened the other night. It was really funny. And it started an argument between two people, but all I was doing was putting down the literal meaning of something, and it caused a massive argument. So Facebook is brilliant for dividing and ruling. But the point is that there's a chap on there who was basically a singer in the 60s, and very, very narrow, and he thought the things that I was putting out were just wild conspiracy theories. Then I sent him a video on replacement migration, and every single thing I put on there, which is to do with the UN and all of this globalism stuff, he's ticking and putting a like on it now. Whereas before it was like, you lot are mad, you're a racist, you're anti-Semites, you're conspiracy theorists, Elvis's brain is on the moon, I'm off, But now it's like, oh my God, I've looked into it. And that's all people have to do. And that's what the bigger picture is all about, like getting it out there. I mean, I don't know, because when we did the talks up north, people were very, very attentive and listening, and I don't know whether that's the same everywhere, but they seem to grasp onto it pretty quick and knew a lot about it. And the talks that we put out are, that it's quite broad, but it does contain pretty much everything you need to know, I think, because it is condensed down quite a lot. And I'm trying to condense down what I do even more, because I go into sort of esoteric stuff, which I really like, but I've stripped that down and put it into another talk now. And but I keep finding things like biblical references and things like the Watchers and what was said about all this stuff and about this interbreeding with humans and all this stuff, because it is to me a big part of it, because what's going on is far too big to be orchestrated just by people we call globalists. There must be another agenda going on. And this planet has been quarantined. People are on a farm on this planet because they're registered, taxed, and basically controlled from the day they're born. So, in other words, it is actually a form of a prison. And the whole idea of this is to get out of that and have a bit of freedom. And that's what I try and do at every possible kind of opportunity. In other words, that a lot of this stuff can be a choice, and the prison that the media puts you into is probably the worst one, because the propaganda that's coming out now, I think, would have been laughable 20 years ago.
Yeah.
That's my personal opinion.
It couldn't have been created without social media. I think social media is a big thing, because it influences so much, and I think
it's a two-way street,
young people have so much to deal with, and I think social media is really fueling a lot of this agenda.
Well, Angie's just put again in the chat. There's other people in the chat. I'm just putting some good points in there. I just got a savaging from some Extinction Rebellion types for climate change denial.
Oh, good.
Good.
On with climate change denial. Well, no, let's be clear.
Climate's always changing.
Climate has always been changing, and these people can't think beyond the brainwashing in their minds, so they just call it denial, which just shows their total ignorance of the realities of the world.
Yeah, I mean, everything is evidence and fact based. And if you ask an Extinction Rebellion person when they're lying across a bridge in Westminster, what do you have any solutions? They haven't. They just want to stop everybody. Oh, but we've got to do something. They don't have any solutions at all. They can't, because the whole thing is a fake anyway.
Well, yeah.
But,
it's based on the SR15 document, which hasn't got any facts in it, and which none of them have read in the first place. So I think they're off to a bit of a bad start with that one. But they are recruiting people over the country, and it's like a cuckoo type situation where they take over groups, and all of a sudden it's called Extinction Rebellion. A little bit like what Reclaim the Power did, and of course Climate Camp, who took over Occupy. 1 minute it's about the financial system, the next minute it's about climate change, and that happened pretty instantaneously. So, again, it's all about the change agents who are bringing it in. Without the change agents, it couldn't be implemented so quickly.
Well, it's a religion, isn't it?
Yeah.
Actually, it is a religion. You said this new world order is a-religious. Well, that's partly true, but I think the climate change thing is a religion for them.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing about it all is that we cover this every single week in some aspect or other, and in quite a lot of detail. So the idea of repeating a lot of this stuff over and over again from different angles, to me, is the most important thing, because you're talking about a very simplistic template. And if you look at it as ideological subversion, which is actually what it is, then it all becomes quite clear. It's not about empowering anybody, it's about disempowering everybody. That's what it's about. So when they talk about empowering groups and being vibrant and diverse, it's always the opposite. It's totally the opposite of what it's presented as. And when you actually look into it and what's behind it, that's exactly what it is. So it's kind of simple, really. But if you've been brought up with political correctness, then a lot of these people who call themselves liberals, which I don't really understand, but it's like the whole terminology's changed as well. They've invented this fake far left, they've got the fake far right, and then they've got people they call liberals, But they're not really liberals. If you look up the meaning of this is probably why all the libraries are disappearing and books are going out of circulation, because nobody can look things up anymore. Apart from if you're looking for the 50 different genders. I thought Goldsmiths College one was brilliant, where they call women WimXN. That's just fantastic. It's just like something out of Star Trek, So, Spock, are you saying that on your planet women aren't women? Well, Captain, the Galactic Federation insisted that we used WOM, but then of course we have the XN model for our females. Fascinating, Spock. It's just absolutely ridiculous. It should be treated as the joke that it is. But of course it's Goldsmiths College, and they do not have a sense of humour there. The way they argue is brilliant. I'm generalising here, obviously. Obviously I'm generalising, but with my interactions with them, I went on one of their threads once, and it was unbelievable what the fella came back with. I mean, it was, you ask them a serious question and they go, "Oh, so you believe that lizards, the Queen's a lizard?" I said, "No, I'm saying that the IPCC document is flawed." This is the sort of thing they come back with, and they all do it. So they're all being subverted at this level within their sort of kingdoms of subversion. It's absolutely incredible. But you come up against this quite a lot, don't you, Piers?
I do indeed. Yes. I think the point about people have to stand up to nonsense when they see it is fundamental. And there's only a certain proportion of the population prepared to do that. Most people, most of the time, follow the crowd. And the aim of the globalists is to make the crowd big enough so that their crowd big enough so that it's difficult to speak out against it. I mean, I find it is very difficult in some arenas to speak out against climate change because people are so brainwashed. Speak out against the falsity of man-made climate change because people are so brainwashed and on a daily basis. However, we are making inroads on that. I mean, we did recruit people out of Extinction Rebellion frames of reference, and around the country we have been getting good responses at the bigger picture and at festivals. Compared with last year, we've had better responses, I would say. So I think things are changing, but we have to work even harder to do it.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting when you get out there and find that people are fairly normal still in most places, I mean, I'm just going to read this out because it's a brilliant example. I was actually going to put it in a video because it was so funny, okay? Basically, I put a comment up, and let me just go back to the beginning of it, actually, because I think we need the opening comment. It was a Stop Trump march, right? It was something about Stop Trump. This Wednesday in London with fantastic international speakers, Europe faces a stark choice, plunging into a new dark ages marked by the rising tide of fascism and nationalism, or advancing a new politics of radical and progressive change. This is what they're saying, right? So basically, I put
European Union.
I know. That was how it started.
Insane.
And so I put a quote on there. Yeah, I put a quote, and I said, "Sounds like Soros." So this guy's immediately jumped back in. This is from Goldsmith College. He says, "You sound like an anti-Semite," right?
Huh?
And then I said, "You have just supplied."
Because Soros is
well, he's the man who actually took money off the Nazis to get rid of Jews. Yes, he calls himself a Jew. Yes, okay. So as it sounds like Soros, you sound like an anti-Semite. I said, "You have just supplied a brilliant and predictable quote. I will quote it on next week's show. An example of the worn-out psychological subversion of those with no argument." And he says, "Would that be a show about flying saucers and why climate change is fake news?" I said, "Why are subversives so predictable? Why can't they debate without resorting to the same old cliches? We debated Demos at Goldsmiths, and despite their propaganda tricks, they lost the debate. Why don't you debate with us at Goldsmiths about your subversive tactics? We could stream it." And he goes, "Did you debate if they were lizards or not?" And basically, this is the way they go on, and you cannot get anywhere with that. So you're up against a real big problem here, and once you get these sort of responses, there's no way you can actually go with it because you can make fun of them. And I do it on Democracy Now. Democracy Now, that awful Soros-funded show that's on every day, and they virtue signal to what they think are minorities. It's usually people who are funded within the Native American community to be on national television, right? And so they wear an earring and they go, I'm a native Red Indian. But basically they're pushing something, they're pushing an agenda which is from a change agent group, and none of them will understand that. They can never see through it. And it's the same thing. They push the same agendas every day. And it's a narrow raft of agendas. It's about 4 different things they push. Climate change, minority groups, anti-Trump, and basically they throw in a bit of Palestine to be trendy,
Yeah.
But it's absolutely unbelievable when you get that sort of response, because if that is what they are taught to do, that means they are part of the problem, and there's a lot of them that are.
Yeah, it's just it's another form of shutting you down, isn't it? Or not allowing you to speak by just ridiculing everything you say. It's just a tactic, isn't it?
Yeah. Andy's just put in, the conspiracy version of Agenda 21 apparently is solely due to the John Birch Society. Now, the John Birch Society did do something about that, but there's a great show by the late Michael Collins Piper, and he calls it My 5-Minute Membership of the John Birch Society, because he saw through them straight away, as he did with many other people, and he knew a lot of this stuff that was coming. But of course, he was an anti-Semite who thought that lizards rule the world, and that's really the goldsmith's answer to it. So in conclusion, Sandy, what would you like to say about the transgender agenda?
Well, it certainly is a huge thing that's gaining an awful lot of momentum at the moment, because it's being pushed so heavily by the medical profession and the education system and everything else. And I think it's up to individuals to speak out about it and to not be shut down, and don't be in fear of saying what you believe to be true, because all the time that we submit and are quiet about this, the quicker it will actually take hold, and it is a destructive agenda. If you're trying to make mainstream sexuality that's been literally on this planet for thousands of years, and outlaw it and replace it with something that is distorted, then and that's not putting any trans people who genuinely have a dysphoria, but this is being pushed as a political agenda, and that's what I'm against. I have huge compassion for anybody that's confused about their gender. It can't be easy, but on the other hand, if this is a government-controlled agenda to push it, which I believe it to be true, then we need to stop it in its tracks, because it's about depopulation, and it's about people not having a sexual identity that they can actually, having maybe 50 sexual identities, which is just completely confusing the whole issue. And it's a nonsense. The whole thing is a nonsense, creating these pronouns and these different genders. It's just confusing the issue, and we have to fight against it. And the only way we can do it is by speaking out and not being told, oh, you're transphobic, or worrying about being called transphobic. I know I'm not. I have transgender friends who've had reassignment, and they are against this too.
I don't think we have to validate that at all, because, I've known people who are transsexuals and transgender, basically transvestites to transgender, Yeah. But you just respect what they are, and you don't. Yes, I've never made a big deal out of it until this has come along. This is the point, though, isn't it? It's about making a huge big deal about it. The other thing I wanted to bring up is it's hard enough work between two sexes, but 50, that's just. I don't even want to know. You know what I mean? I'm far too late in my life to actually get my head around that, because I find it hard enough work just with one opposite sex. I don't think I can handle another 49 of them.
You're absolutely right.
We have to sort of make allowances. You see, that's the whole point of the thing. This sort of yin and yang thing. It's about being able to understand why women are women and what makes them tick, which can be incredibly difficult and complicated for males. But the point is, it's also the other way around. So the idea of it is that you look back and you observe and you think, oh, right, that's not the right thing to say there. Don't say, oh, you're going out dressed like that, you look flaming terrible. We know basic things that we have to be careful of. To say, that was a bit of a silly example, but the point is that a lot of this stuff, the common sense which comes from generations and that you learn by experience and through other people, is being totally wiped out. So in other words, you have no reference to anything.
Yeah. And also there's that thing about difference. The whole thing about men and women is that they do have fundamentally different brains, and this has been proven scientifically. That women's brains function differently to men's, and it's great they do, because that everything complements each other, doesn't it? And we're told in one way to celebrate the difference in diversity, but suddenly we're being told to rip apart these two sexes and not celebrate the fact that they're just saying, well, we've only got one brain and it's neither male nor female, and your body is neither male nor female, and your mind and your body and everything about you, your individuality, is not male or female, it's something between, and it can be a range of 50 different things in between, which is mad.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even have a chance to talk about what the 50 different things were, and in actual fact, I'm not really that interested in it, because...
No, I'm not, because it's a nonsense.
Yeah, of course it is, yeah.
They're just made-up terms.
Yeah.
Ridiculously made-up terms. I mean, what's interesting is that they actually... now there's this... They're calling it queer gender, and queer used to be a derogatory term, and it was coined by this feminist called Judith Butler, in the 1990s. She wrote a book about it, and she sort of started this whole thing off about being genderless, and it's been picked up, and since 1990 it's just been forwarded. Her kind of ideology has been forwarded. So she was trying to disrupt and cause chaos by trying to disrupt the whole binary thing, and it's happened. It's quite successful now, because she was a lecturer at Berkeley in the 1990s. And she wrote a book called, I think it was Gender Trouble, I think it was called. And she was really, she's the grandmother of this particular thing called queer gender. And it's just become this big trendy thing now. Yeah.
Yeah, very true. And if you think back to like the 70s and 60s, really, the sort of androgynous look that came in, that was, I suppose, paved the way for all this. But we didn't realise that at the time, because some of that sort of, the way it was presented was actually quite good. And now you think, that makes sense. If there was a 50-year plan, then to introduce androgyny, and then, of course, you get into all the stuff where the sexes do start to cross over. Well, they don't really, but just by appearance. And then you can bring this in. So what gets me, though, is that it's coming so quickly. I mean, talking about these 50 different genders, I mean, I haven't had time to even look at what they are, and I'm not interested in what they are, because I know it is nonsense, and there's things of far greater importance. So again, it is actually focusing on trivia, and of course, all the things we've said. I think that's probably about it. We're nearly out for time now, but we'll be back next week at 9 p.m. on Windows on the World. And do please actually book us for our talks. The information's on the site, info@windowsontheworld.net, and we'll see you all next week at 9 o'clock. Thanks a lot, Sandy.
Thank you.
Here's little words of wisdom.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's it from Piers, and this is Consciousness.
You're welcome to Windows on the World, and the concept of how Earth run today. Because today, the way the world run today, they're not running by the law of life. Because the law of life is just one law. But they create their law to go around the law of life.
That's it. We like the real law, natural law, and the law of life. Until next week, that's it from Winners on the World. Thanks a lot.